Testimony Tuesday with Nathan Loyd. Today on The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong, chaste heart of St. Joseph. I'm your host, Jim Havens, and our guest today is Nathan Loyd, Staff Counsel at Thomas More Society, thomasmoresociety.org. Nathan, welcome back to The Simple Truth. How are you today?
I'm doing excellent. I'm so excited to be with you again. I had a lot of fun last time, and thanks for giving me some more time to talk with you. It's going to be great.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. And for this special format, Testimony Tuesday, we've been doing these since the beginning of this show, which was about 4 years ago now. And always a blessing when someone's willing to share some of their story. So thanks for doing it. And we always start in the same place at the beginning. So what was your early life like, your family, the culture that you grew up in?
Well, so I looked at some of the other guests that you've had on for this over the past few months, and my story is I was baptized as a baby, and it worked. I don't have these big stories that a lot of my friends have, where they fell away from the church and they woke up on the side of the road after a DUI, and then they spent a night in prison, and then they found Jesus again and came back to the church. I was baptized as a baby. I went to Catholic school, and now I'm here. I just turned 39 yesterday, and I'm married for 16 years and have 8 kids. So there's a lot of grace that comes through the sacraments, and that has happened in my life. And I think it's incumbent on every person who's baptized, especially as a baby, to accept that grace and let Jesus work in their lives. But so I grew up in Ohio, middle class family. My dad was a mechanic. My mom was a real estate agent, and we had a good life. I have 2 siblings, and we went to my parents made a lot of sacrifices to make sure that we could go to Catholic schools. So I went to Our Lady of the Rosary grade school. I went to a high school run by Marianists, and it was every once in a while I would see the bill come in the mail, and I would see how much my parents were paying for tuition, and seeing the sacrifices they made. My dad working double shifts and triple shifts and overtime and all these things to make sure that we could have a good Catholic education really made me want to take it seriously and get the benefit of what they were sacrificing for. So what that looked like, going to Catholic school and being constantly indoctrinated in the faith, and every lesson is imbued with religious messages. It helps to give you the right focus on all these secular topics. But yeah, at a certain point, I was always good at math and science, and I wanted to be an astronaut. And so I loved watching science programs on PBS. Bill Nye the Science Guy I watched like 3 episodes of that every single day when I was growing up. I was kind of obsessed. And at a certain point, this tend towards scientism kind of crept in. I was getting these religious lessons that were always benign and kind of empty. Like, Jesus was nice, so let's be nice. Let's talk about how much Jesus loves animals. Aren't animals great? And that doesn't really fill a young man's soul with any kind of spirit or vigor. And then at the same time, I'm hearing these amazing feats of science. I'm watching space shuttles go up into outer space, and those two seem to be in conflict in some way. And so I was going down that road of thinking, well, science is everything, right? I would always, I still would pray, but that was a pernicious thought that kind of crept in my adolescence. And I think it was important for me to be in these Catholic schools because that's where I first encountered the hard theology. At some point in junior year of high school, actually, I remember this very vividly. My religion teacher had us read the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. And that was the first time I had really been encountered with something that was hard and meaningful and a challenge in the same intellectual rigor that I had seen all the science been in. And that's where my faith, I think, really came alive when I saw that there are ways to be challenged in your faith. This is a rigorous science. The smartest people in history have been Catholic theologians, and that opened up a lot to me. Another thing that was really important when I was growing up, I think that there are many millions of souls in heaven due to grandmas praying the rosary. I'm pretty confident about that. And my grandma was somebody who would always pray the rosary every single night while she's watching Grand Ole Opry. I'm not sure if that's the right way to do it, but it set a good example for me at least. And I remember her when I was a little boy. I remember her showing me the rosary and telling me to pray the rosary. And for some reason, by some grace, that stuck. So I've always loved praying the rosary, even if I'm not very good at it. There were some periods in high school where I had a special intention. And so I promised God, I would say, like, Lord, I'll say 30 rosaries if you have prom go well. And then the day of prom, I realized I hadn't said all the rosaries yet. So I remember like sitting in the basement praying 30 rosaries in a single day right before I left for prom. And it was things like that, just little instances of grace being injected into my life and rescuing me from boredom and abyss and loneliness that have sustained me to this day.
Nathan Loyd is with us, sharing some of his story today with us. And Nathan, so praise God. I love the stories where it just is the faith catches early on by God's grace, and it's really a story of getting stronger and going deeper as you go. But I do wonder, because my story is very different, and so I have more of one of those dramatic conversion stories where, to me, there were a lot of very big encounters that I had with God, where he really showed me this is real. He's real. The Catholic faith is real. And so those were monumental in my life. But I think about it for my own children as they're growing up and trying to provide all the spiritual foundation for them. And they're kind of, just soaking in it from an early age. But I'm wondering, are they having any big encounters with God that is helping them to understand that this is real? Or maybe those aren't needed as much because they're just kind of soaking in this atmosphere of God's presence. I don't know. What was it like for you? Anything that you can share on that?
So I think C.S. Lewis kind of talks about this a bit. He speaks about this in the context of marriage and spousal love, but he makes the point that at the beginning of a relationship, it's all fire and sparks, but that gets exhausting. You can't sustain fire and sparks forever. At some time, it becomes embers that have an enduring, deep warmth that lasts and truly heats instead of just being a flash. And he talks about that in the context of marriage. And I think it makes a lot of sense there. Nobody can have a marriage 20 years in that is, the same kind of giddiness that you had when you were 18. There's a place for that, but it doesn't really work because you're building a family and you need to sustain it. You need to have the energy to sustain everything that's demanded of you in family life. And I think that analogy works very well for our relationship with God. I think that, and that makes a lot of sense, right? Because marriage is a way that we understand God, that sacrament gives us insight into the Trinity. And in the same way, our relationship with God can have these bright flash moments, which are so beautiful and so good, but not everybody gets them. And I think that there's a real danger of people expecting that to happen. There's amazing stories like yours of these tremendous transformational moments, a rejection of the past, a latching onto a new future. But not everybody gets that. And as St. Paul says, we shouldn't sin so that grace abounds all the more. It's not necessary. God can give us these graces in our day-to-day lives, and the things that seem kind of mundane and ordinary, they're actually not. That's God sustaining you. Me even just having a full stomach and having a conversation with you right now, that is a miracle in its own right. It doesn't seem big because it happens all the time, but that just means that we all get access to miracles all the time. And so in my case, my faith journey has been more of that steadiness. For my entire life, there's a steady undercurrent where, by God's grace, I've never really questioned the truth of the Catholic Church. I've never really questioned God's existence. And I attribute that to grace, of course, but then also a healthy Catholic culture that I was brought up in, where it didn't make sense to question these things. I always knew that my parents loved me, that Jesus loved me, and there was never a question about that. And so it gave me this steadiness and this firm foundation from which I could jump off and be more successful in life. So I think for any of your listeners who haven't had these St. Paul getting knocked off a horse moments in their lives, it's not necessary. And in fact, I think most people don't get that. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that they're loved any less. It just means that they're loved in a unique way. And that unique way may be a constant hug over your entire life from God rather than a slap in the face. And it can be kind of discouraging sometimes when you hear these amazing stories from friends and But we need to not forget that God is always with us.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Very well said. Nathan Loyd is with us, Catholic husband and father and staff counsel at Thomas More Society. We're going to hear more from him, his personal testimony, whatever we can get in here today. Thanks be to God. So yeah, wonderful. As we head into the break, maybe prayerfully ponder this and just we want to live in this surrender. Sometimes, we think about, and then I surrendered. It's like, well, that's where we want to stay. That's where we want to live, is to really dwell in that full surrender to God, where that's just normal and natural. And so as we strive to do that, really trusting God, accepting what he has for us in the big things and the little things, in all things, and really striving to respond with fidelity and love. We're going to be right back with much more. Stay tuned.
iCatholic Mobile is a proud sponsor of the Station of the Cross. Solid connections, reliable data. That's iCatholic Mobile, a 5G wireless provider dedicated to your faith and values. Enjoy unlimited talk and text, dependable coverage nationwide. And every plan has unlimited data and free roaming in Canada and Mexico. iCatholic Mobile, the service that connects you to what matters most. More info at iCatholicMobile.com.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today on this Testimony Tuesday, Nathan Loyd, currently staff counsel at Thomas More Society, thomasmoresociety.org. We're going to get right back with Nathan in a moment. But first, if you are buying or selling a home, there's an easy way to help the Station of the Cross at the same time. Real Estate for Life has 1,400 experienced, morally grounded agents in the U.S. and Canada. Visit realestateforlife.org to find a Christ-centered, experienced realtor near you. And don't forget to mention the Station of the Cross. All right, Nathan, anything else on anything kind of into the high school years, transitioning into the college years? Specifically, I wonder about just the period of sort of prayerful discernment of what is God's good plan for you, whether it's regarding vocation, what might you be called to there, or even, what about your studies? What are you called to pursue? Anything you remember from that time that could be helpful?
Sure. So when I was a late teen, early 20s, I was discerning a call to the priesthood. And I think, obviously that call did not come through. But I think it was really important for me and for every young man who's serious about their faith to consider the priesthood and do a discernment retreat, because that helped me understand what does vocation look like and what does discernment look like. And it helps me to find a wife better. So my wife and I met freshman year of college. We met in a philosophy class. She came in and her hair was looking fantastic that day, but she was also crying because she had dropped her computer. And so both of those things, her beautiful hair and her being sad, wanted me to come to her rescue and make her feel better that day. So I asked her out to lunch, and we started dating a few months later, and we got married at the end of college. But that discernment of whether I'm called to marriage or the priesthood, that was a very difficult time, because at some point I knew I wanted to marry her, but I also was discerning this call. And it became depressing. I'll be honest about that. I felt like I was being pulled in a direction I didn't necessarily want to go. And it was a struggle. And it was important to go through that struggle and talk to God about what did I want my vocation to be. It wasn't, I realized during that time, it wasn't simply a question of what does God want. He opens the conversation to us. And through that struggle, I realized that God does ask us what we want. And he's put these desires in our hearts and wants us to give that back to him. And so through that, I was able to say, Lord, I want to marry this woman. I want to have a family with her. You put this desire in my heart to be with her and raise children. So why would you put that desire in my heart if you're calling me to something else? And I think God responded to that prayer. And here I am, married for 16 years. I think it's about 16 years, somewhere around there. And I have an incredibly strong marriage. And so those graces that come from the discernment process are not just present in the moment of discernment, they carry on through the entire vocation. And that was a huge part of college, was discerning. I went to Notre Dame, which was sometimes it gets a bad rap in the press, especially Catholic press, but it's a great school and it's worth fighting for. So my relationship with my wife developed because her dorm was right next to mine, and we would go to Mass every night at 10 p.m. in my dorm. 5 days a week, there was daily Mass. And so that's how our relationship developed. And over time, she would come over for Mass, and the sign of peace, we would hug. And then over a few months, those hugs got longer and longer. And then we started dating. So our relationship was formed around the Eucharist from the very beginning. And I think that's a reason why our marriage is so strong and fruitful. And we grew a lot in our faith together during that time. We started going to confession much more often. We started praying the rosary together. We started going to adoration regularly. And those graces were very real, both while we were starting a marriage, during our engagement, and even I think they're sustaining us now. And so having ready access to the sacraments in those formative years is tremendously important. And for any of your listeners who are in college right now, I really encourage them to find the sacraments at every single opportunity. I think that those formative years when you're trying to understand your life and see where you need to go next, you can't miss the opportunity to let God inject himself and guide you and temper your passions and direct your desires. It's so valuable, and that time cannot be made up if you lose it.
Yes, awesome. Nathan Loyd is with us. And so yeah, in those college years, then, if my research is correct, so you are, you're in the field of science, aerospace engineering at Notre Dame, and then nuclear engineering from the Air Force Institute of Technology for Masters of Science. What can you share about that time? And then even Master of Arts in Theology and Bioethics from Holy Apostles College and Seminary. So lead us up through there. Anything you want to share with us?
Sure. So when I got my first bill for tuition for Notre Dame, I realized there was no way I'd be able to pay for it on my own. So I called up the ROTC detachment the next day and signed up to join the Air Force. And I kind of anticipated just doing my 4 years and separating, but I ended up loving it. And it was, I'm still a reservist. It's been a fantastic experience. It helped develop me as a man, but it also gave me a lot of amazing educational opportunities. So as I mentioned earlier, as a young child, I was very interested in science. I wanted to be an astronaut, so joining Air Force ROTC made a lot of sense. In fact, when I was looking at schools, I was deciding colleges based on which colleges had a football team and were Catholic and had alumni who were astronauts, and that pretty much is just Notre Dame. But when I started being an aerospace engineer for the Air Force, and then at a certain point I realized, I have this great education in the sciences, but I don't quite understand my faith as well as I should. And so I decided to get a master's in theology from Holy Apostles, which was a great experience. And it gave me the vocabulary to speak about my faith in a more intelligent way and to articulate what I knew to be true on an emotional level, but it gave me the words to say it and explain it. And that was a very important formative experience because I never really, I understood things that were right and wrong, especially on life and medical issues, but I couldn't articulate why. But through that education, I started understanding moral theology and being able to say, this is how we examine a moral question and how we come to the conclusion. And that's never led me wrong. What was interesting, though, is I was doing that program at the same time that I started doing nuclear engineering. And nuclear engineering is a very fascinating field, especially taught through the Air Force, because you look at defense issues surrounding nuclear weapons and those kinds of things. And I realized during that time that it takes far more faith to be a scientist and an engineer than to be a Christian. Just as an example, one of the things that I worked on was a detector that could identify whether a nuclear bomb had exploded recently. And there's a lot of really interesting science that goes behind it. For instance, you have to look at the radiation detection from atoms of xenon-133 and xenon-135, and the ratio of those two can tell you when a nuclear bomb may have gone off. And it's very interesting science that I can dive into, and if this were a science podcast, I could go on for another 3 hours about that. But at some point during that education, I realized everything I'm doing here is based on faith. I personally cannot prove that this atom produces this signal, which produces this count, which produces this result. The only thing that I'm able to do is to look at a computer screen and see a number. And then I say that number corresponds to this other fact that somebody tells me, and that gives me this result. So in that process, there is so much faith. I have to trust that somebody designed the detector the right way. I have to trust that somebody connected the wires in the right way to give me a number. I have to trust that number actually corresponds to some other fact that somebody else has decided or observed in the past that corresponds to some phenomenon. The only thing that I know for sure is that I see a number on a screen. In contrast, when we read the Summa or we read the Bible, we immediately know the truth of what's happening there. So when Jesus tells me to love my neighbor, I immediately know that's true. When Thomas Aquinas gives us the 7 proofs for God's existence, I can immediately evaluate that being true without millions of dollars in lab equipment. And that was a real revelation for me that science is good. And I'm not denying that science is a thing, and I'm not denying the power of science and utility of science. But when it really comes down to what I know and what I can validate, that's the Christian faith. And it takes far less faith for me to understand that. Another thing that was really exciting during that education period. So I'd gone to a Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, Catholic college. Every one of them had been devoted to Mary in some way. And then all of a sudden I'm in this secular Air Force school. So I decided at that time to dedicate all of my work to Mary. But I didn't want to be ostentatious about it. So my wife is going to hate me for bringing this up. But one of my favorite movies is A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger. And in one scene, the knight, Heath Ledger, is trying to impress a princess and woo her to be his wife. And he says, I'm going to win all of my jousting competitions for you. And she says, no, if you win it, that means you're doing it for yourself. You get the benefit as well. What you should do is lose, because that proves that you actually love me. You're making a sacrifice. And so I took a lesson from that when I was in grad school. And so I wanted to offer up all of my work to Mary, but I didn't want to take credit for it. I wanted to do good things, to give a gift to my queen so that I can grow in love for her. And by growing in love for her, I can grow in love for her son. But I didn't want credit for it. So I did this wonderful thing, which was I didn't look at my grades the entire time I was in grad school. But I worked hard and I prayed a rosary every day, and it was really formative and strong. But I could give this genuine selfless gift to my queen. And it turns out I got almost a 4.0 average, but I found that out after the fact. And this isn't me bragging. This is me just saying the power of making a sacrifice for our mother is so beautiful. And I grew in so much love for her. And I was able to transform this totally secular, almost atheist experience into something that was incredibly holy and fruitful. Also around that time, I was doing a lot of work with the national labs like Lawrence Livermore and Los Alamos. And it was interesting to see the people at these labs because they're the most brilliant people in the world for the sciences. But when you would speak to them, it felt empty. It felt like behind the corner, there's going to be sadness and sorrow and emptiness and despair, because they were all so smart that they had convinced themselves that God doesn't exist. And if I can read a quick quote from St. Augustine that I think really captures what these people were and the emptiness that their brilliance brought them. He's talking about, this is from his Confessions, and he's talking about the scientists who are able to predict when eclipses happen. And I can read this quote after the break.
Sure. Yeah, we'll bring it back after the break. We got the music, and we want to hear it loud and clear, so we'll wait. But I mean, that's just the first of all, the incredible fortitude, self-control, the patience required not to look at your grades at all. It's almost unfathomable to me to be able to do that, thinking about the restraint that would take. But yes, when it's a gift for Our Lady, perhaps, that makes it much easier to do. I'm sure it would have been difficult, but what an opportunity to also enact those virtues, grow in those virtues as well. And then, how wonderful that at the end, when you take a look at the very end, it went quite well. But beautiful story. We're going to be right back with Nathan Loyd. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Nathan Loyd, sharing some of his personal testimony with us today. He is a Catholic husband and father, a staff counsel at the Thomas More Society, where he defends fundamental rights, especially life, liberty, and freedom of speech from a constitutional and pro-life perspective. ThomasMoreSociety.org. We're going to be right back with Nathan. Let's get this in real quick as well. We don't want you to forget about iCatholic Mobile for your mobile phone needs. When you subscribe to iCatholic Mobile, you do help fund the Station of the Cross. Check out iCatholic Mobile, iCatholicMobile.com. All right, Nathan, you've got a St. Augustine quote for us. Go for it.
Yeah, and so the context here is understanding when people are so brilliant that they understand the sciences, but it can really corrupt a soul when they get to that point and this prideful knowledge of the world around them. So St. Augustine observed this exact same phenomenon back in his day. And he was talking about these scientists who were able to predict when eclipses would happen years in advance. And he says that people who have no understanding of these things, of these eclipses, are amazed and stupefied that these people can predict when they will happen. Those who know are exultant and admired. Their irreligious pride makes them withdraw from God and eclipses great light from reaching themselves. They can foresee a future eclipse of the sun, but do not perceive their own eclipse in the present. For they do not, in a religious spirit, investigate the source of intelligence with which they research into these matters. And I think that perfectly encapsulates the modern scientism movement. Science can do many things. Science can reveal many things. Science can predict the future. Science gives us the ability for us to talk right now from hundreds of miles away. And that's all amazing and good, but we can't lose sight of the fact that science can't prove itself, which is to say there are many presumptions about the world that science can't prove, such as reproducibility. There's no reason that me throwing a ball across my front lawn should happen the same way the next time I throw a ball across the front lawn. There's no reason that an eclipse that we can see and predict the next time it comes around should actually happen the next time around. There's no reason that mathematics should describe the physical world, and yet it does. And so we must ask the question, why? And the reason cannot come from the material world. The reason comes from the intellect that God has given us, which is immaterial. And if there is an immaterial reality, well, then we need to investigate that. And how do we investigate that? It's a difficult question that many people over thousands of years have tried to understand and philosophize about. And you and I think, would agree that Jesus is the way to understand what that is. But the modern scientism movement, which I was confronted with as a small child, denies that any of that exists. And it's very pervasive. It's very corrupting. And so I was grateful to have this education in theology at the same time I was doing this education in a very hard science. Especially a science where people pretend to be God. They pretend to be destroyers of world. There's this idea that if we can destroy an atom, we can destroy the world. And if we can destroy, we can create, and we control now. And it's very pervasive, and it's dangerous. So it's important for any of your listeners who are interested in science to make sure that their knowledge of science doesn't forget the basic presumptions underlying how we know things, and that there is an immaterial world that we must interrogate and understand before we can understand science in the first place.
Wow, incredible. Nathan Loyd is with us, and then you also then had this call to become a lawyer. So explain that. How does that emerge? And share with us a little bit around that.
So I think you look at my resume and it looks like I have career schizophrenia. So at a certain point, I realized that my wife and I were having a child every other year, and I projected out what my Air Force salary was versus Catholic tuition, a Catholic school tuition for our every other year child. And the math did not work out in my favor. So I decided around that time in about 2016 to go to law school. Part of the motivation too was I heard a lecture at my graduation speech for my master's degree in theology. I heard a lecture from a woman who had won a Supreme Court case. She was a sidewalk advocate in Massachusetts. And the state of Massachusetts came after her and said, you can't do this anymore. You're harassing women who want to have abortions. You just need to leave them alone. And you're allowed to be on the sidewalk, but you have to stay hundreds of feet away from them so that you're not really bothering them. And this sweet, beautiful woman, she said, at first she said, okay, I can figure out how to accommodate this. But then she realized, no, I'm an American. my country gives me rights. I deserve to be on the sidewalk talking to these women. Nobody should be able to stop me from this, because that's what our ancestors fought and died for. And so I get to be out there. And so she decided to fight. She sued, went all the way to the Supreme Court and won. And she was the commencement address for that year. And I was really struck that I've dedicated my career to supporting and defending the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I had done a lot of work to defend our Constitution against foreign enemies, but our civil rights mean nothing if they're not enforced at home too. And so I knew I wanted to be part of that fight, especially for our First Amendment liberties of free exercise. When we look across the world, we see so many people who don't have that legal protection for their religious rights and their religious practice. And in every single case, religious practice is trampled upon and cast aside, and then the country just self-corrupts. And we consider the religious liberty rights to be the principle of the rights that we have, because without that one, the rest of them all fall apart. If there's no countervailing force against a powerful government, our other rights don't matter for anything and will be trampled upon and stolen and diminished. So we need to have this frontline battle about our religious liberty. And hearing this woman's speech really convinced me of that. So I decided to go to law school. I went to law school during the evenings. So I'd go work a full Air Force duty day, have dinner for 17 minutes with my kids before I had to catch the train into D.C., go to law school until 9:30 and come back home and repeat. And it was a miserable 4 years. I can't recommend anybody do that. But I'm grateful that I did in the end, because I have one of the best jobs in the world now. There's a small irony that part of my motivation was to make sure that I could have more income than I could make in the Air Force. But now I do pro bono religious liberty litigation, which certainly is not the same kind of salary that a big law would pay you. But every single day that I'm doing this work, I know that I'm serving somebody, and that there's an innocent person who has been attacked by an unfair force, trying to prevent them from doing what God is telling them to. And I get to be part of that fight for them. Many times a lot of the work I do supports sidewalk advocates. And I've reflected frequently, these people will thank the Thomas More Society for supporting them and making sure that they can be out there on the sidewalk. And when they thank me, I feel a little guilty, because I don't have the moral courage that these people do. I don't have the courage to be on a sidewalk and get spit at and yelled at by really hostile forces. I also don't have the patience to talk to a woman who's in a really dire state and show her love that she needs to see in that moment, give her the resources she needs, walk with her in a very difficult walk. I'm not able to do that. Those are my own moral failings. What I can do is write a legal brief. And so I'm grateful that I get to support in that way, but my clients are the real heroes. They're the ones who have a lot of risk. I get to sit in my comfortable home office and file legal briefs, and I'm not personally at risk. And so it's such a privilege to be part of that fight to support the Constitution in that particular way, especially getting to know clients who are wonderful people who are making big sacrifices just to do what God tells them to do.
Well, Nathan Loyd is with us. Yeah. And just talking with you a bit here, and then the last interview we had, I will just say, you absolutely could do it 100%, and you would be very good at it. So just take that for what it's worth. But I think that is an obstacle for many of us to getting to the sidewalk, especially that first time and reaching out. Again, as you mentioned, it's one of those things that it's just good, like a young man discerning the priesthood, for all of us to kind of just discern, okay, Lord, do you want me to step out in faith with you and pray and reach out on the sidewalk in this way? And yeah, we go where he calls us, but yeah, and everybody has different calls and different roles and all of that. And Thomas More Society, the beautiful work that is being done there, so incredibly grateful. And I love how you talk about the importance of good lawyers and good lawyers with a strong Catholic formation. And when you look at your bio, mine's similar. It's kind of like all over the place in a certain sense. Yours is more linear than mine is. But when you look at it, it's like, look, God has been preparing you. There is a certain science to the law. There certainly is a morality and an ethics and bioethics, very important with with respect to the law. So it seems you have received an extraordinary formation to do what you are doing and to be very well positioned going forward for this fight. And I love what you said earlier about Notre Dame. Things are worth fighting for, right? These institutions are worth fighting for, and our nation is worth fighting for. So, just beautiful stuff. And anything further you want to share about the current work that you're doing now?
Well, so I'm really glad that you brought up institutions, and I think you're spot on that there's this kind of modern movement among faithful Catholics to reject institutions. And I think that's a little broken. Institutions are how we do big things together. And they need to be rescued. They need to be perpetuated. They need to be saved. And they need to be fought for. So I think another paradigm here is that in that rejection of institution, what I see among many of my friends and among many of my peers is that there's this kind of rejection of college and higher education. And I understand it. Like, there are many bad colleges out there. There are many horror stories about a good Catholic girl going to a Catholic college and coming home a rampant atheist. And that is a real danger. However, every single person will need a lawyer, will need a doctor, need an accountant, need a politician at some point in their lives. And so we can't throw off higher education. It's good and worthy to be a plumber. It's good and worthy to be a carpenter. But when that carpenter lives in a state that's going to force him to violate his conscience and go against his religion, that carpenter needs a lawyer to fight for him. And so for your listeners who have children who are in this discernment phase of what their careers are, if God has given them an intellect and the ability to do these hard fights in these kind of institutional jobs, they should explore it. They should not just cast that off. It can come with great cost, of course, but everything does. Everything meaningful comes with a big cost. And so I hesitate when I hear friends who have really brilliant children who would do well in college and who could go do these institutional roles, telling them, you don't need to go to college. I think that we do need to encourage our children still to go to college, to preserve these places, and to be in the position to do the hard fights, the powerful fights, the political fights. Because if we aren't fighting those fights, we will lose. And that's something I'm very grateful for the Thomas More Society and getting to work with them, because Thomas More Society is on the front of all of these issues: euthanasia, transgender policies in schools, pro-life issues, free speech, free exercise, rights of conscience. We need to be there fighting. And for instance, another big case that we're working on right now is the right of doctors to tell patients about abortion pill reversal. There's multiple states in the country that are saying doctors may not tell their patients about this procedure. So a woman may come to her doctor after she's taken the first abortion pill, or after she's been slipped an abortion pill by a boyfriend who doesn't want her to be pregnant. And the doctor is forbidden from telling her that she can go get that reversed. And so we need to fight those fights. And the way to do that is through institutions.
Absolutely great stuff here today with Nathan Loyd, staff counsel at Thomas More Society. At the Thomas More Society, go to thomasmoresociety.org for more information there. But when we get back, final segment with Nathan, we'll see what the Lord wants to stir up. I do want to bring it back to just asking him if there's anything further to share about being a husband and a father, and anything along those lines. We talked a lot about the work and the calling there, but all throughout, as you mentioned, those 16 or so years of being married and many children, and so where's God in all of this? What has he learned? What can he share with us? We're going to be back with more in just a moment. Stay tuned. Back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Nathan Loyd, sharing some of his story with us today on this Testimony Tuesday. Very grateful for it. Nathan is a Catholic husband and father, staff counsel at Thomas More Society, thomasmoresociety.org. Final segment here. And so, as a husband and a father, Nathan, certainly it's a difficult vocation, and yet an incredibly beautiful vocation. What have you learned along the way now, about 16 years in, and many children? I think you mentioned 8 at the top of the show. What jumps out? What can you share with us?
Yeah, I think it's 8 kids, somewhere around there. We lose track every once in a while. But So my wife and I obviously follow the church's teachings about contraception, and that is so fruitful and good and has made us better people by being open to God's actions in our lives and being open to further life in our family. It pushes us to be better. And I think that there's this modern paradigm of you can either have a sports car or a family. And yeah, generally that's accurate. But I think about what my life would be like if I didn't have a family relying on me, especially 8 children who can provide none of their own sustenance. And there's no way that I would have gone to so much education and stayed in the Air Force and become a lawyer and all these other things and worked so hard. If it was just me relying on myself, I would probably be sleeping on a mattress on the floor and playing Mario Kart all day. And so having this openness to life has required me to work harder and to be a better man and to have courage and go into the world. And as a result of that, it's led me to do these other things, these other good things for other people through the Thomas More Society, for instance, or through leading airmen in the Air Force. It's amazing how these secondary effects are all good, but kind of unanticipated. It was very surprising and such a pleasant surprise to see when we chose to follow God in this particular way. It led to fruits that are kind of unrelated, or at least non-obvious. So being open to God's work in our lives in that way and the teachings of the Catholic Church has borne a lot of fruit. Another thing that we've seen in our marriage and family life is that sometimes God likes to be dramatic. Right? I hope it's not disrespectful for me to say that we call God a drama queen sometimes. And that's happened sometimes in our lives. And I think it's just him just making sure we're paying attention. So one of my favorite stories from our marriage and from our family is the birth of our son, Fulton. So my wife and I love Fulton Sheen. We love him a lot. We listen to his lectures all the time. He's such a man's man, like he hates communism, and that he would be able to go tell you the funniest joke that you've ever heard and then make you cry about your own sins and then forgive you for your sins in the same conversation. So I remember listening to one of Fulton Sheen's lectures on the drive home one day when my wife was about 8 months pregnant with our son. And in prayer, I was thinking, Bishop Sheen, I love you so much, but your name is kind of weird. And it's kind of bizarre for a baby in this day and age to be named Fulton. That's bizarre. I don't like it. It feels gross. I live in Fulton County, and I don't want people to think that I just love Atlanta so much that I would name my son after this. And in prayer, I heard him say, would you turn down the name because it sounds weird? You are a coward. You are turning down graces. And so, okay, all right, fine, Bishop Sheen, you got it. His name is Fulton, settled. And so when my son was born, normal pregnancy, normal labor, but at one point, the doctor came in to check on the progress and realized that his umbilical cord had come out before his head. So because of that prolapsed cord, he was cut off from oxygen for a few minutes. When he was born, he had an APGAR score of 1. And so immediately, we started asking Fulton Sheen's intercession. So it was very providential that he had yelled at me in prayer a couple days before, because, of course, Bishop Sheen's recognized miracle is a little baby boy who was born dead, and they tried to resuscitate him, and then after about an hour, he came back to life on his own. And so I instantly thought about this, and my wife and I were both praying, asking Bishop Sheen's intercession to save our little boy. He was born basically a kind of a pulse. That's about it. And they were sure that he was going to have brain damage. The doctor came in and told my wife that she's recovering from an emergency C-section. He's alive, but barely, and he's probably going to have developmental delays. He's probably going to have all kinds of brain damage. And so we kept praying. And then the next day they came in and said, okay, well, we haven't seen any further signs of brain damage. We're cooling his body down so then we can halt any damage that may have occurred. But when we warm him back up, we probably will see some signs of damage. So keep praying, and he comes back up to normal body temperature after this cooling period, and there's no signs of damage. And then the doctors say, well, this is great, but we need to do an MRI to see if there's any signs of brain damage. So they do the MRI, no signs of brain damage. And then they tell us, okay, well, this is all good. Everything's fine for now, but the signs of harm will perpetuate in the future. He's going to have a bunch of developmental delays, so make sure you have support plans in place for all of these things. And my little boy was walking by the time he was 8 months. He's 3 now. He's perfectly fine. And we attribute all of that to Bishop Sheen's intercession. So I'm excited to share that story and give hope to parents who might have complicated pregnancies, name your baby Fulton. Ask Bishop Sheen's intercession. It was so beautiful. And one of the deals that I made with Bishop Sheen in prayer, there's a story he tells about promising to build a chapel in Alabama. I don't know why he picked Alabama, but he tells this story, and I can't find any evidence that he actually did build that chapel in Alabama. So I told him I would do it for him. So if any of your listeners have some free land in Alabama, I am shopping. But it was just such a grace to see an intercession in such a dramatic way. God let us get to know Bishop Sheen through this intercession, and we have the reminder every day of our lives that God can work miracles, and the saints are real, and they intercede for us. And I have this little boy who I get to hug as this tangible reminder of God's presence in our lives. And we're so grateful for that. And it was amazing to see that and experience it with the woman I love, to experience that together. It made it so much more meaningful and fruitful rather than just having a personal prayer that's granted. So thanks for letting me share that story. I'm very passionate about Bishop Sheen. We love him so much.
Yeah, phenomenal. And yeah, sounds like a story that is still unfolding. So I look forward to hearing how that continues to go. Land in Alabama. So if someone is selling or has some land for Nathan, let him know. But yeah, that's just beautiful story. So, and Venerable Fulton Sheen, we do ask you to intercede for us, pray for us. All right, we're just a couple minutes to go, Nathan. Anything else that you want to get in before we wrap it up today? Feel free.
I think I've been reflecting on this lesson a lot over the past few years. And I think this is a lot of what I've spoken about today is the conflict of science and faith, and the dangers of going into science without some kind of religious foundation. And what I've observed, and I find this controversial. I think it's a little bit of a controversial take. My friends don't always agree with me on it, but I think that curiosity is a very dangerous vice that is not spoken about for young men. Curiosity, St. Thomas Aquinas talks about curiosity being a vice and studiousness being the virtue that accompanies and opposes the vice. But in my own life, I see this curiosity vice popping up all the time. For instance, after we're done today, I'm probably going to go check the news and go on a long tirade about what happened today in the news. I don't need to do that. I need to be in prayer, and I need to temper those vices. So it's important to recognize your own vices and what virtues oppose them at all phases of life.
Wow. Yeah. No, thanks for getting that in there. Very, very helpful. And so much that's so good and so helpful throughout this show. So thanks be to God for it. And thank you, Nathan, for saying yes, coming on, sharing some of your story with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Want to encourage everybody to learn more about Thomas More Society. Go over to the website, thomasmoresociety.org. Stay up with them and the cases that they have ongoing. Keep them in prayer and the good work that they're doing. And certainly keep Nathan Loyd and his family in your prayers as well. God bless you all.